The unexpected visitor. The evening sun had started to soften, casting a golden hue across the quiet Los Altos neighborhood where Sundar Pichai lived with his family. The house, though modern and elegant, carried a humble aura that reflected Sundar's nature. It wasn't the kind of place one would expect to see heads of state or flashing camera crews outside. Yet, on this particular day, something extraordinary was about to unfold. As Sundar returned home after a long day filled with back-to-back meetings, strategic discussions, and quiet moments of reflection, he noticed something unusual. Parked discreetly near his driveway was a black convoy of official cars, their tinted windows concealing the occupants inside. At first, he thought it might be a security check or perhaps a neighbor hosting some high-profile guest. But as he stepped closer, his heart gave a small, involuntary jolt when he saw a familiar figure stepping out of one of the cars, surrounded by aides and security personnel. It was Prime Minister Modi himself. For a moment, Sundar froze at the sight. It wasn't that he felt intimidated. He had spoken to world leaders before, walked through corridors of power, and stood on some of the most influential stages on Earth. But there was something deeply personal about this. This wasn't a conference room or a world summit. This was his home, his private space, where his children played, where his wife prepared evening tea, where the scent of fresh jasmine often filled the air. To see the Prime Minister of India standing at his doorstep was surreal, almost like a scene lifted straight out of a film. Sundar's wife, Anjali, stepped out onto the porch, her expression mirroring his astonishment, though she quickly composed herself, her natural grace taking over. The Prime Minister walked forward with a warm smile, his hands joined in a respectful greeting. Sundar responded instinctively, folding his hands and bowing slightly, an old habit he never lost despite the many years he'd spent abroad. "Namaste," Modi said, his voice carrying both warmth and authority. "May I come in?" Those words, simple yet profound, echoed in Sundar's mind. Here was the leader of the world's largest democracy, casually asking for entry into his home. Sundar invited him in with a slight tremor in his voice, partly from excitement, partly from the weight of the moment. The security team positioned themselves around the property with silent precision, ensuring the visit remained discreet. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The living room was modern but understated. Bookshelves lined with works on technology, philosophy, and history, family photographs arranged neatly, a few artworks that Anjali had chosen over the years. Modi observed everything quietly, his gaze lingering on a photo of Sundar's parents. "They must be proud," he said softly. Sundar nodded, feeling a sudden lump in his throat. "Everything I am is because of their values," he replied. There was an authenticity in his words, something that even the Prime Minister seemed to sense. As they settled, Modi turned toward Sundar with a seriousness that cut through the polite conversation. "Sundar," he began, "you have done so much for technology, for innovation, for India's image around the world. But I didn't come here just to talk about achievements. I came here to talk about something deeper." The room fell silent. Sundar leaned forward slightly, his mind racing through possibilities. Was it about a new collaboration? A digital policy initiative? Perhaps a global crisis? But what came next was not what he expected. "I want to understand what drives you," Modi said, his tone calm but intense. "You have power, influence, and recognition. Yet people say you remain humble. In a world where success often changes people, you have stayed the same. Why?" Sundar looked at him, momentarily speechless. It wasn't the kind of question one could answer with rehearsed lines or corporate language. It was deeply personal, almost spiritual. His thoughts drifted back to his childhood in Chennai. The small house, the old rotary phone that fascinated him as a boy, the long walks to school with his brother, the evenings spent studying by dim light while his parents sacrificed their comforts for their children's future. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. "I think when you grow up seeing what real struggle is, when you watch your parents work hard, not for themselves but for you, it grounds you. Success doesn't feel like something to show off. It feels like a responsibility." Modi listened intently, his eyes not breaking contact. "And how do you keep that humility?" he asked, "when the entire world is watching you, praising you, even criticizing you?" Sundar took a deep breath. By remembering that none of this is permanent. Power shifts, fame fades, technology evolves, but values, they remain. There was a quiet power in that statement. Modi nodded slowly, almost contemplatively. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned back and asked, "What if I told you that tonight's visit is not just a courtesy call? What if there's something far bigger at stake? Something that could change the way India approaches its future?" Sundar felt his pulse quicken. This was no ordinary conversation anymore. Something significant was about to be revealed. He glanced briefly at Anjali, who, though silent, had the same question in her eyes. Modi's aides exchanged subtle looks, as if waiting for a signal. Then Modi leaned closer and lowered his voice. "There's a project," he said, "and I need someone I can trust to help shape it, not as a politician, but as a visionary, as a son of India." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sundar's mind swirled with thoughts. What kind of project could warrant a personal, unannounced visit from the Prime Minister? What did he mean by someone I can trust? He felt a strange mix of honor and apprehension, as if he were standing at the edge of a path that could alter everything he knew. Modi looked him directly in the eyes, and for a brief second, all the titles and positions disappeared. It was not the Prime Minister speaking to the CEO of a global company. It was one man speaking to another, asking for something personal and profound. And then, just as Sundar opened his mouth to respond, Modi raised his hand slightly. "Before I tell you more," he said, "I need to see something. Something that cannot be explained in reports or presentations. Something that only your heart can show." Sundar frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Modi smiled faintly. "I want to meet your children," he said. "I want to see how they see you, not as the world sees you, but as a father." Those words struck Sundar deeply. They carried a weight he didn't fully understand yet. But he knew instinctively that this moment was the beginning of something extraordinary. He called out to Kavya and Kiran, his children, who were upstairs working on their projects. As their footsteps echoed down the staircase, Sundar's heart raced in a way it hadn't in years. Modi turned his gaze toward the stairs with a quiet curiosity, almost as if he were preparing to witness something that would decide the course of the night. The moment their faces appeared at the top of the staircase, everything seemed to slow down. The golden light filtered through the windows, casting a gentle glow on their innocent expressions. Modi's eyes softened. Sundar stood between his children and the Prime Minister, feeling the gravity of the scene unfold. He didn't know it yet, but the interaction that was about to take place would leave an imprint on everyone present, setting the stage for revelations, challenges, and choices that would test every value he held dear. The Prime Minister rose from his seat, his gaze fixed on the children, and with a slight smile he said, "Come here." The night had only just begun. The test of character, the room carried an unusual stillness as Kavya and Kiran descended the staircase, their curious eyes darting between their father and the Prime Minister. Kavya, thoughtful and observant beyond her years, held her younger brother's hand firmly, sensing the weight of the moment even if she didn't fully understand it. Kiran, a mix of excitement and shyness, whispered something to her that made her smile nervously. Sundar stood near the base of the stairs, watching them approach, his heart swelling with both pride and an inexplicable sense of foreboding. Modi's presence was warm yet commanding, and there was something in his eyes, a kind of searching gaze, that made it clear this meeting was more than a polite exchange. As the children stood before him, Modi slowly bent down to their level, his hands resting lightly on his knees. "Do you know who I am?" he asked gently. Kiran nodded quickly, his voice almost trembling with excitement. "You're the Prime Minister," he said, his eyes wide. Kavya didn't speak right away. She simply studied him, as if trying to understand the deeper reason for his visit. Modi smiled at their honesty. "Yes, I am," he replied. "But tonight, I want to talk to you not as the Prime Minister, but as someone who wants to know your father through your eyes." Sundar felt a strange tightening in his chest. This wasn't something he could control, manage, or prepare for with strategic thinking. This was raw, unscripted, and personal. Modi turned to Kavya. "Tell me," he said softly, "when you think of your father, what is the first thing that comes to your mind?" The room fell quiet. Kavya looked at her father for a moment, then at Modi, Her voice, though calm, carried a weight that surprised everyone. "He listens," she said. "Even when he's tired, even when we think he's too busy, he always listens. Sometimes he doesn't even give us answers right away. He just makes us feel like what we say matters." The simplicity and honesty of her answer struck Modi visibly. He straightened slowly, exchanging a meaningful glance with Sundar. Then he turned to Kiran. "And you," he said with a playful smile. "What about you? What do you think of him?" Kiran fidgeted, glancing at his sister for support, then spoke in his own innocent way. "He never shouts," he said. "Even when I break things, he explains why it's wrong, but he never makes me feel small." Sundar felt his eyes grow moist at his son's words. It wasn't the grandeur of achievements that defined him in their eyes. It was the quiet, consistent kindness. Modi paced the room slowly, absorbing their words. Then, in a voice that carried both warmth and challenge, he said, "Sundar, do you know why I asked to meet your children?" Sundar shook his head silently. "Because the way a person leads their home tells me more about their character than any public achievement ever could," Modi continued. "Nations are shaped by values, not just policies. I wanted to see if the man the world praises is also the man his children trust. And they do." Sundar lowered his gaze for a moment, humbled by the gravity of the moment. But then Modi's tone shifted, growing more serious. "However," he said, "there is another reason I came tonight. I didn't want to discuss this in a boardroom or an office because what I'm about to ask is not a professional favor. It's something that touches the core of identity, legacy and responsibility." Sundar listened intently, every word pulling him deeper into an unknown path. Modi continued, "India stands at a crossroads. We are advancing rapidly, but we are also at risk of losing something precious, our ability to lead with humility and vision. There are forces, both internal and external, that want to shape our future in ways that benefit only a few. I need someone who not only understands technology but understands people, someone who can bridge the gap between innovation and integrity." As he spoke, Sundar felt a sense of unease and purpose intertwine. This wasn't about a ceremonial role or a symbolic partnership. This was about something real, something that could redefine his role in the world. Modi stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There is a new initiative," he said. "It is confidential for now. It's called the Vision Arc. It aims to create a framework that integrates technology, education, ethics, and governance in a way no nation has attempted before. It requires someone with global insight but rooted values." He paused, looking directly into Sundar's eyes. "I came to see if you are that person." The weight of the offer settled like a dense fog. Sundar's mind raced. On one hand, this was a profound honor, a chance to shape the future of his homeland in a way that transcended business and politics. On the other, it was a responsibility that could alter his personal life, his role at work, and his family's rhythm forever. He glanced at Anjali, who had been quietly observing. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, years of shared sacrifices and dreams passed between them. She gave a small nod, not of agreement but of trust. She trusted him to listen to his heart. Before Sundar could respond, Modi surprised everyone by sitting on the floor cross-legged, motioning for the family to do the same. "Let us talk as people," he said. "Not as Prime Minister and CEO, not as leaders, but as human beings." They formed a small circle in the living room, the golden light slowly giving way to the calm embrace of twilight. Modi began sharing stories from his early days, of struggles, travels, unexpected lessons learned from ordinary people. His words were not polished speeches but honest reflections. Sundar found himself listening deeply, as did his children, their usual restlessness replaced by quiet fascination. Then Modi asked Sundar something that cut deeper than any policy proposal. "Tell me," he said, "have you ever felt like your success has distanced you from the ordinary life you once knew?" Sundar hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "The world moves fast. You build things, lead teams, solve problems. But there are nights when I sit alone and wonder if I'm still that boy from Chennai who used to dream under a dim light." Modi's expression softened. "That boy is the reason you are who you are," he said. "Don't ever lose him, because the moment you do, everything else becomes hollow." The conversation grew deeper, layered with moments of reflection, laughter, and unexpected vulnerability. For Sundar's children, it was the first time they saw their father not as a figure of quiet strength, but as a man being challenged to look inward. For Anjali, it was a reminder of the man she had known before the world discovered him. And for Modi, it was a way to gauge the soul behind the achievements. As the night deepened, Modi finally leaned forward. "Sundar," he said quietly, "I will not pressure you for an answer tonight. But understand this, what I am offering is not just an opportunity. It is a calling. And sometimes in life you don't choose the calling. It chooses you." Just as he finished speaking, one of Modi's aides entered the room, whispering something urgent into his ear. Modi's face shifted slightly, revealing a hint of concern. He stood up and turned to Sundar. "There's something happening right now that you should see," he said. "Something that will make my request clearer than any words could." The family exchanged puzzled looks as Modi gestured toward the door. Outside, the quiet neighborhood was no longer quiet. Several cars had gathered at the end of the street, people holding signs, cameras flashing. Sundar felt a sudden chill. Something bigger was unfolding, and this was only the beginning. The night had turned from personal reflection to something far larger, and Sundar could feel the weight of destiny pressing gently on his shoulders. The gathering outside, the air outside had shifted from the calm of a suburban evening to a restless murmur filled with flashes of light, raised voices, and the low hum of engines idling. Sundar stepped out first, his heart thumping in a way that had nothing to do with fear, but everything to do with uncertainty. The street, usually quiet and lined with soft lamplight, now looked like the edge of a storm. A cluster of cars had formed near the end of the road, their headlights casting uneven beams across the trees and pavement. People were standing in small groups, some holding placards with phrases that were hard to make out from a distance, others holding cameras or streaming devices, their faces illuminated by the glow of their screens. Modi followed him out slowly, his security team already in motion, forming a subtle but firm perimeter. Kavya and Kiran peered through the window, their eyes wide with curiosity and a trace of unease, while Anjali rested a protective hand on their shoulders. As Sundar walked a little closer, the murmurs grew louder. A few people recognized him immediately, pointing and whispering his name, their voices carrying a mix of awe, expectation, and frustration. It wasn't the usual media crowd or fans waiting for a soundbite. This group felt different. Ordinary people, local community members, a few activists, perhaps some employees who had driven there after hearing rumors of the Prime Minister's visit. What united them was the intensity in their expressions. These were not people looking for autographs or photos. These were people who had something to say. One man stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly but his voice steady. "We heard he's here," he said, pointing toward Modi. "And if he's here, then maybe finally someone will listen to us." Sundar exchanged a quick look with Modi, who nodded for him to go ahead. Sundar approached the group slowly, his presence calming the noise a little. "What's going on?" he asked softly. The man hesitated, then spoke with a mix of desperation and respect. "It's about the new data policy that's being discussed back home. It's going to affect millions of small businesses like mine. We feel invisible. No one is explaining what's really going to happen. They say it's about digital growth, but for us it feels like being left behind." The words hit Sundar in an unexpected way. In boardrooms and global conferences, data policy was a topic of strategy and security. But here, in the face of a struggling business owner, it was something visceral, human. Another woman stepped forward. "My parents run a small online teaching service," she said, her voice quivering with emotion. "They've built it with everything they had. Now they don't know if the new rules will crush them or help them. We're scared. And no one is giving clear answers." Sundar listened closely, his mind already piecing together the layers beneath their concerns. Modi joined him, his presence drawing quiet respect. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he observed the faces in the crowd, tired, anxious, determined. Then he turned to Sundar, his voice low but firm. "This," he said, "is why I came to you. Policy isn't written in rooms like this one, but its impact is felt exactly here. These are the people whose trust we must earn, not with speeches, but with real understanding. Sundar nodded slowly. He felt something stir deep inside him, a sense of responsibility that went beyond technological leadership. It was as if the world outside his walls had suddenly walked up to his doorstep, demanding not a figurehead, but a listener. He stepped forward, raising his hand slightly, asking for silence. "I hear you," he said gently. "I can't give you answers tonight, not yet. But I promise you this, I will carry your voices into every room where these decisions are being shaped. Not as a favor, but as a duty." The crowd murmured, their skepticism mixed with a flicker of hope. It wasn't a politician's promise, and they sensed that. It was something quieter, more personal, and therefore more believable. Modi watched this exchange with a faint, knowing smile. Then, without the usual formalities, he did something unexpected. He walked into the crowd, shaking hands, asking questions, listening carefully. No podium, no cameras dictating the flow, just honest conversations. Sundar watched him, realizing that despite his position, Modi understood the power of presence. This wasn't a scripted visit anymore. This was becoming a living example of leadership grounded in human connection. Amid the conversations, a young boy, no older than Kiran, approached Sundar hesitantly. He held a small tablet in his hands and said shyly, "Sir, I built an app with my friends to help old people order medicine online, but now I don't know if it will work after the new rules. Can you check it?" Sundar knelt down, taking the tablet gently, scanning through the interface with a spark of fascination. It wasn't perfect, but the effort was clear. "This is brilliant," he said softly, looking the boy in the eyes. "Don't stop building. Rules will change, systems will shift, but people like you are the future." The boy's face lit up, and for a brief moment, the tense air softened into something hopeful. Back inside the house, as the crowd slowly dispersed under the watch of security, Modi and Sundar returned to the living room. The atmosphere was no longer the same as it had been earlier that evening. Something had shifted between them. Modi sat back down, his voice quieter now but filled with weight. "You saw it yourself," he said. "This isn't about speeches or ceremonies. This is about trust. And trust cannot be commanded. It must be earned." Sundar nodded, the images of those faces outside still vivid in his mind. "I understand," he whispered. "But what you're asking, it's more than just advising on a project. It's stepping into something that could change everything for them, for my family, for me." Modi's gaze was steady. "Exactly," he said. "That's why I came to you. Not everyone can carry this. But you can." The clock ticked softly in the background, each second marking the deepening weight of the night. Kavya and Kiran had fallen asleep upstairs, unaware of the gravity unfolding downstairs. Anjali sat beside Sundar, her hand resting gently on his, grounding him. Sundar looked at Modi, the question forming on his lips but not yet spoken. Modi leaned forward slightly, his voice low and deliberate. "Tomorrow," he said, "a closed-door gathering will take place. Leaders, thinkers, and change-makers will be there. They don't know I've come to you. They think this is still theoretical. But if you walk in tomorrow with me, everything changes." The room fell into silence once more. Outside, the street slowly returned to its quiet rhythm as if nothing had happened. But inside, Sundar knew something had begun. A shift he could neither ignore nor fully understand yet. He stared at the darkened window, seeing his faint reflection beside Modi's, and for the first time, he felt the edges of two worlds pressing against each other. The private one he cherished, and the public one that was calling him forward. And then Modi added one final line, his voice soft but piercing. "When you stand in that room tomorrow," he said, "you won't be speaking as a CEO. You'll be speaking as the son of a nation watching you." Those words lingered long after Modi retired for the night, echoing in Sundar's thoughts as he stood alone in the quiet house. He knew that tomorrow would not just be another meeting. It would be a moment that could redefine everything. The room of decisions the following morning unfolded with an unusual silence. Even the birds outside seemed quieter, as if nature itself sensed that something significant was about to take place. The sun rose steadily, casting soft rays through the curtains of Sundar's home, but inside his mind everything felt heavier, more deliberate. He had barely slept, his thoughts looping through every conversation from the night before, the faces in the crowd, Modi's quiet yet unshakable words, the weight of the boy's question about his small app, and most of all, the idea that stepping into this new role could change the rhythm of his family's life forever. Anjali noticed the deep stillness in him as she placed a cup of tea on the table. She didn't speak, but her gentle touch on his shoulder told him everything. She trusted his judgment even if neither of them fully knew where this path would lead. As the morning progressed, a convoy arrived discreetly to take Sundar and Modi to the private gathering. It wasn't a public event, nor was it announced anywhere. This was a closed-door meeting in an unassuming building tucked behind a cluster of old trees on the outskirts of the city, a place chosen for its anonymity rather than grandeur. As they approached, Sundar noticed the subtle presence of security personnel, plainclothes officers, and quiet movements that hinted at something far more significant than the simple facade suggested. Modi, seated beside him in the car, remained calm, occasionally looking out of the window, his expression unreadable. Sundar felt his pulse increase with every passing minute. When they arrived, they were led down a long corridor lined with minimalist wooden panels, the faint scent of sandalwood lingering in the air. At the end of the hallway was a double door, and beyond it, a large circular chamber. Sundar paused briefly at the threshold, taking in the scene before him. The room was filled with a diverse mix of individuals, policymakers, education reformers, leading scientists, digital ethics specialists, innovators, social workers, and a few people he recognized from previous international collaborations. The seating was arranged in a wide circle, emphasizing equality rather than hierarchy. No podium, no rows, no stage. It was a space designed for honest conversation, not spectacle. As soon as Modi entered, the room rose in respectful silence. He raised a hand lightly, signaling them to sit, and gestured for Sundar to walk beside him. Several heads turned, surprise flashing across faces as they registered his presence. Whispers rippled through the group, not out of disrespect but out of curiosity. Sundar wasn't on the list, and everyone knew it. Modi took a seat, and Sundar sat quietly beside him, aware that every eye in the room was studying him. The session began with Modi setting the tone. His voice carried a quiet gravity, free from political rhetoric. Today, he said, we are not here to discuss agendas or make declarations. We are here to shape something that will outlast all of us. Vision Arc is not just a policy. It is a foundation. If we build it with clarity and courage, it will hold for generations. If we build it with ego, it will crumble before it begins. The room listened intently. He then gestured toward Sundar. I have invited someone who understands the world not from a distance, but from the ground up. He has walked both the dusty streets of his childhood and the digital corridors of global leadership. I want him to listen today, not speak yet. And when the time comes, I want him to tell us what he truly sees. Sundar nodded slightly, taking in the murmurs that followed. As the discussions unfolded, he sat quietly, observing. What he heard was both inspiring and unsettling. Some spoke passionately about empowering the next generation through digital education, ethical frameworks, and sustainable innovation. Others, however, spoke in veiled terms, their language polished, but their intentions tangled in self-interest. There were debates about ownership of data, control over emerging technologies, and who should set the rules for a rapidly changing society. Sundar could sense subtle power struggles beneath the surface, alliances, cautious rivalries, and the quiet maneuvering of individuals who saw Vision Arc not as a shared mission but as a tool to shape influence. A turning point came when a senior policy strategist stood up and said, with the right structure, we can ensure that innovation remains under responsible guidance. That way, no external forces can disrupt the narrative we build. His tone was confident, but something about it made Sundar uneasy. He had heard similar language in corporate boardrooms, the kind that cloaked control in the language of protection. A young woman, a digital rights advocate, immediately countered. Guidance or control? She asked. Because if we build walls around innovation, we may end up suffocating the very people we want to empower. The room tensed slightly. Sundar's eyes narrowed as he watched the exchange. Modi remained silent through these moments, occasionally glancing at Sundar, as if waiting for him to truly absorb the texture of the room before speaking. Sundar leaned back, his mind unfolding memories of his early days at Google, of teams debating openness versus control, of witnessing how one decision could ripple through millions of lives. He realized that this wasn't merely about policies on paper. It was about the philosophical backbone of an entire nation's digital future. After hours of debate, Modi finally spoke again. "We have heard many voices," he said. "But what we need now is clarity from someone who stands both inside and outside this circle. Sundar, tell us what you see." The room fell into a heavy silence, every gaze fixed on him. Sundar rose slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders like a quiet storm. He didn't rush. Instead, he walked a few steps into the center of the circle, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. "What I see," he began softly, "is both promise and danger." His voice carried easily in the quiet chamber. "When I was a boy, I lived in a small house with limited access to technology. But every small invention, every little improvement, changed how we lived. Technology was never distant. It was intimate. Now I see a world where innovation is faster, larger, more powerful. But the question remains the same. Who is it for?" He paused, scanning the faces. "If VisionArc becomes a platform to control, then it will divide. But if it becomes a bridge between citizens and institutions, between past and future, it will unite," he continued, his tone deepening. "Real innovation thrives not when power is centralized, but when trust is distributed. We must lead with humility, not fear. We must design systems that empower the smallest voices, not silence them. And if we are honest, the world is watching how India will shape its digital soul, not just for itself, but for many who will follow." His words settled over the room like a quiet tide. Some nodded slowly, others shifted uneasily, but everyone was listening. Then Sundar added something unexpected. "But before you design anything," he said, "step outside this room. Talk to the boy holding his tablet, unsure if his app will survive. Talk to the woman teaching online in her small house. Talk to the people who will actually live inside the world you are about to build. Because if their voices are not here, then this circle is incomplete." The silence that followed was profound. Modi watched him, his eyes reflecting both pride and relief. The young digital rights advocate smiled faintly, while a few strategists exchanged tense glances. Sundar had not only addressed the room, he had shifted its energy. As the session concluded, Modi leaned toward him and whispered, "You did not just speak. You changed the air in the room." Sundar exhaled slowly, realizing how much emotional energy it had taken to speak those words. He didn't know what the immediate impact would be, but he sensed something had begun to move. Outside, as the meeting dispersed into smaller groups, a few approached Sundar privately. Some thanked him, some tested him with sharp questions, and a few observed him with cautious curiosity. The path ahead was not going to be smooth. It was clear. But as he stepped out into the late afternoon light, he felt something different within himself. Not certainty, but a growing sense of purpose that was deeper than any corporate mission he had ever undertaken. Modi walked beside him in silence for a few moments before finally saying, "Today they saw you. Not the global figure, not the CEO, but the man who remembers where he came from. That is exactly what this vision needs." Sundar didn't reply immediately. He looked up at the sky, a pale blue canvas above the trees, and felt the first quiet whisper of a destiny he had not sought but could no longer ignore. The real tests, however, were still ahead, and he sensed that the forces that had listened silently inside that room would not all agree on the future he had just described. The fracture beneath the surface, the days that followed the gathering, unfolded like a carefully composed symphony, outwardly calm, but beneath the surface, invisible tensions began to stir. Sundar returned to his daily work routines, but nothing felt quite the same anymore. Board meetings, strategic briefings, product reviews, everything carried a subtle undercurrent of distraction. His mind kept drifting back to that circular room, to the faces that had silently measured his words, to the moment when the young advocate's eyes lit up in agreement while others exchanged guarded glances. He could sense that the conversation had not ended in that room. It had simply scattered like embers carried by a quiet wind, each landing in a different corner, waiting to ignite. Late one evening, as the sky darkened into a soft indigo and the hum of the city dimmed, Sundar sat alone in his study, surrounded by old photographs and mementos from his early life. There was a picture of his parents in their modest living room in Chennai, his father adjusting an old radio while his mother smiled patiently beside him. Beside it was a faded notebook from his student days, filled with rough sketches of circuits and handwritten ideas for tools that could make everyday life easier. As he traced the lines of those memories with his fingers, he felt the same quiet fire that had pushed him to learn, to build, to dream beyond what was visible. He realized that this new journey wasn't just about policy. It was about returning to that core, to the boy who believed that innovation was meant to lift people, not to confine them. But not everyone shared that vision. A few days later, Sundar received a discreet invitation to an informal dinner at a private residence. It wasn't from Modi. It was from one of the senior strategists who had spoken confidently during the meeting about responsible guidance. The message was polite, but the wording carried an unmistakable weight. A private conversation about Vision Arc's future direction. Curiosity mixed with caution as Sundar agreed to attend. He arrived at a secluded estate on the edge of the city, where soft lights illuminated manicured gardens and the faint sound of classical music floated through the air. Inside, a small group had gathered, policy veterans, influential business figures, and a few international observers. Their smiles were warm, their greetings refined, but Sundar could feel something sharper beneath the surface. As the dinner progressed, conversation flowed smoothly at first. They spoke about technological trends, global shifts, educational reforms. Then, slowly, the tone began to change. One of the guests, an older businessman with a measured voice, leaned in toward Sundar. "Your speech at the gathering was inspiring," he said, "but perhaps a bit idealistic. Openness and distributed trust sound poetic, but history shows us that control is necessary to avoid chaos. Nations thrive when strong hands guide them, not when they are left to the unpredictable winds of individual voices." Others nodded subtly, their expressions carefully neutral. Another strategist added, "People admire transparency, yes, but they also seek stability. Sometimes too much openness invites disruption. We believe Vision Arc should be shaped by a core group, those who understand the nuances, rather than being swayed by every small voice in the crowd." Sundar listened carefully, recognizing the deliberate choice of words. They weren't opposing his vision outright. They were reframing it to sound impractical, trying to draw him gently into their narrative. Then came the real pivot. A woman with striking precision in her speech leaned forward. "You have the trust of millions, Sundar," she said. "Your words carry weight across borders. If you stand with us, the entire framework will take shape faster. We can create a structure where the surface appears open, but the levers remain in responsible hands. Imagine what we could achieve if we moved decisively, without the distractions of endless debate." Her eyes held his steadily. Testing him, Sundar understood then what this dinner truly was. It wasn't an exchange of ideas. It was a recruitment. They were trying to bring him into their fold, to use his credibility as the public face of something that, beneath its polished surface, would consolidate power in quiet, invisible ways. He set his glass down slowly, the weight of his next words hanging in the air. "What you're describing," he said evenly, "may build something efficient, but it won't build something lasting. Systems built on control eventually collapse under the weight of their own walls." The air shifted subtly, the warm smiles tightening just enough for him to notice. One of the older strategists chuckled softly, though there was no real humor in it. "You are idealistic, Sundar. Admirable, but perhaps not entirely realistic. The world is not a classroom where every voice can be heard equally. Leadership means choosing whose voices matter." Sundar met his gaze calmly. "And history shows what happens when leaders decide that only a few voices matter," he replied quietly. The conversation grew sharper beneath its polite surface, like a chess match played with soft words and hard intentions. Sundar left the dinner with a clear understanding. There was a fracture forming beneath Vision Arc, a divide between those who saw it as a chance to build a transparent future and those who saw it as an opportunity to quietly tighten their grip. And somewhere in between those two forces, he stood, a figure whose decision could tilt the balance. Back home that night, he found Anjali waiting in the living room, the dim light casting soft shadows across the room. She didn't ask many questions, but as he shared what had transpired, her expression grew thoughtful. "They want you because you're trusted," she said softly. "If you choose their path, people will follow without seeing the walls being built. But if you resist, they'll try to push you out." Sundar nodded slowly. "I know," he whispered. "And that's what makes this more dangerous than it seems. This isn't a battle of policies. It's a battle of narratives, of what people believe is being built in their name."